podium to assist with the presentation tonight and to answer any questions. And we also have our associate planner, Tom Oliver, here as well. And so we're going to take you through this brief PowerPoint slide that I have here, a presentation. I printed you some hard copies just in case. Oh, there it is. All right, so Town Center Strategic Plan. Okay. As I go through this, please stop me if you have any comments or questions as we go through this. We're going to go through a lot of information, and so please, again, if you have any questions, please just give us a question. Let's see.
Is it on?
Yes. There we go. All right, the team embarked on this project beginning in January of 21, so it's been roughly over a year doing this, but the Town Center Strategic Plan provides a framework to revitalize, reimagine, and strengthen the heart of Los Alamitos. The Town Center zoning area will establish a scenario to hopefully increase economic development, attract businesses, provide property owners an easier path for projects, and help address the city's regional housing needs assessment, or RHNA numbers, that has been assessed by the state of California. Part of the plan will establish a pedestrian, bike-friendly oriented town center that hopefully has wide tree-lined sidewalks on Los Alamitos Boulevard and Catella that, again, will mark the town center, connect all parts of the city to the town center, including Los Alamitos Medical Center and our schools, which includes high school, Oak Middle School, and McAuliffe Middle School. It attracts the scale and type of development desired, anticipates a variety of mixed-use development with an emphasis on food and outdoor dining, and build upon the city existing practices and enhance the experience of hosting community events on Pine Street. I believe council is aware that we hold many events on Pine Street, such as Winter Wonderland, the My City, My Los Al Street Fair, and we have a couple coming up in a few weeks, including the upcoming Parklet series and concerts on Pine Street that will be happening in the summertime on 4 separate dates and on Thursday. Okay, Los Alamitos has a diverse mix of uses, including top-tier schools. If you talk to a lot of people, that's, a lot of people say that that's one of the reasons why they come to Los Alamitos is because of the excellent school district here. We have large employment centers, such as Bar Baker, Trend Offset, and right next door to us, Epson, and a great quality of life. We're safe here, and we have, again, a nice blend of commercial businesses from restaurants and retail shopping in the city or nearby. And of course, the city's proximity to freeways. We're close to the 405 freeway and the 22 freeway, and we're right in the middle. And I tell people that in 20 minutes, you could be in downtown LA, barring no traffic, or 20 minutes you're down in Irvine, again, barring no traffic. So we're right in the middle of, LA County and, of course, Orange County. And because of that, it makes Los Alamitos a fertile ground for development, interest, and investment. So where is the town center? So the town center here is 54 acres. It's approximately 19.6 acres. And so if you're on Catella, the town center is basically going from Chestnut, where basically the CVS is on Chestnut and Catella, to Reagan Street, basically where St. Isidore Historical Plaza is. As you can see on the map, where the highlighted kind of like that orange reddish type, that's the town center. And on Los Alamitos Boulevard, it goes from Florista to Farquhar. So that's where the town center is at. Okay, I'm gonna kick it over to Mr. Loomis here to talk about our next few slides.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Council, for seeing us this evening. So this particular slide is the same image of the town center, except this time we're looking at the plan view. This particular image is your current zoning designations. So you can see the area that was highlighted in orange in Ron's previous slide corresponds with what today is your town center mixed-use zoning district. So in the original, or the 2015 general plan that's currently in effect, this area was designated as a town center, and the town center zoning was adopted at that time. Part of our charge in this particular exercise had been to really imagine what the future of that red district could be in terms of its visual form and kind of development that could come forth out of those zoning standards. And one of the features that we ended up looking at and kind of asking some questions about and ultimately making a recommendation on was the density for residential development in this area that was designated in 2015. The current zoning, as you can see in the top 3 bullets, is 30 units an acre is the max residential density. For commercial development, that'd be an FAR of 2.0. That means basically a floor area ratio of 2 times the lot area, so that's effectively a 2-story building if you maximize 100% lot coverage, but a max height of 60 feet in all cases in terms of development. What we found as we looked into this is that 30 units an acre is probably a little bit low in terms of really wanting to incentivize kind of a change of development in the town center. Of course, one of the obvious evidence of this is that nobody's come forth to develop a mixed-use project in the town center area since the zoning was adopted in 2015. And so part of our recommendation is that you ultimately increase the allowable residential density on an individual lot up to 60 units an acre, so double that. However, you would not change the overall height of 60 feet. That's basically a 4-story building. You'd keep that height restriction in place. You'd keep the FAR restriction in place for commercials. So it's really just affecting the residential density. Because at 4 stories, which is your 60-foot height limit, you can develop a 60-unit building without a whole lot of trouble. It's actually quite feasible, and we've done a number of studies to convince ourselves that that was possible. However, what we are recommending there on the bottom bullet, however, is that you impose a kind of max development within the entire town center of 588 units as a kind of development cap. It's kind of an odd number. Where did we come up with 588? Well, if you recall on Tom's previous slide, it's 19.6 acres in the town center mixed use district, times 30 units an acre gives you 588. So by increasing the density on an individual lot basis up to 60 units an acre, but also bringing in this overall cap in the total district of 588, you're maintaining what your current general plan has already analyzed. So part of the documentation that we prepared includes this fairly extensive environmental assessment. It's an addendum to the environmental impact report that was prepared for the 2015 general plan. And essentially what it says is that by imposing this development cap at 588, the level of impacts that increased density would have is consistent and is no greater than what was previously analyzed in 2015 and what's currently the adopted city policy. So this would mean, in effect, that the early developers, people come first, would kind of have a kind of clearance. If somebody shows up and they're at the unit 600 within the district, they'd be out of luck. They'd have to go through some other sort of process. But as you'll see momentarily in our previous studies, we think you're probably a long ways off from getting 600 units in this particular district.
Question for you. Obviously, you were looking at the downtown area, but it seems to me, and we'll talk more about this as you go through the process, that you're going to need some higher densities in basically Old Town East and Old Town West in order to support any kind of increased densities and more shopping and everything in this area. So I'm wondering, what thought went into that? Has that been feedback that's shared with staff, or what's the thinking in terms of really how to make this a viable? I mean, it's been sitting there for a long time without really developing. So if we're just talking about these parcels and trying to get development going on them, I think that's good, don't get me wrong, but I think it needs to encompass some increased densities in the more general area.
There's a good question, and we did not look at increasing density outside of those 19.6 acres. That was our focus of our study. Part of the logic of increasing the allowable density within the town center from 30 units an acre to 60 units an acre was to encourage development to show up that would do the mixed-use projects and bring in the new ground floor retail. Because that is a requirement of your current code for ground floor retail. We're generally keeping that with some minor sort of tweaks, but or suggesting you keep that with minor tweaks. But part of the motivation is to say at 4 stories, and if you keep your development at 30 units an acre, you're almost leaving 2 stories of potential development undeveloped And so by going up to 60 units an acre, we're saying somebody could really maximize that 4-story height limit, or the development allowed under 4 stories within the town center. Hopefully that's an incentive for some of the older commercial development that's really kind of reached the end of its life or coming close to the end of its life to want to turn over, be developed, and bring in the kind of higher quality of commercial development that's part of your economic agenda.
And sir, I might just answer, or just specifically to your comment. There is other areas in the city that definitely would benefit from this type of zoning, especially providing developers and property owners incentive to actually develop, kind of like you're pointing out. The reason for focusing on this area is to try to ensure that we can first get that ground floor retail actually going, and so having it happen in a cluster as opposed to one-offs here and there. So it really is a strategic move to try to bolster development in one area before we expand that envelope to other areas in the city.
I have a question since we're on this slide now anyway. Forgive me if you've already answered it in what you've been speaking.
I threw a
We
lot of
gonna
information out there.
Try to make it
Okay.
really plain and simple. I like it plain and simple. So to go from the 30 to 60 units, is it like housing units or total units, period?
That would be housing units as measured in an individual development, right? So typically, your code, most codes in your code as well, measure the allowable residential density as a unit per acre. So if you have a 1-acre parcel in the town center, today you could develop that to a maximum of 30 housing units, whether those are like single units or family units. It's 30 units is the way the code is read. We're recommending that that could be increased up to 60 units. So if you've got that 1-acre parcel, you'd be able to develop up to 60 units on that 1 acre.
What would the size on those be? Because typically, especially in that area, families move in. So
Very-
what size are we talking to get to 60? Because I think that that would probably be a very driving factor.
Yeah, very good question. You've actually queued up my next slide.
Hey now.
So this is what, on the proposed development standards, you could potentially see. So there's sort of there's really kind of 2 predominant types of development you would see in the town center in Los Alamitos. The bottom one is your 3-story townhomes. You see this all over Orange County and southern LA County. You've got some good examples on Cerritos that's relatively new. That particular 3-story townhomes is really coming on pretty close to 30 units an acre in terms of its density, a little bit short of that. But what you can see with that, however, is that that's pure residential. It's the front doors, those front doors coming out to the sidewalk, those are for the residential units. We think on the side streets in the town center, not facing onto the main boulevards, like this is a reasonable development prototype. If you were to allow this in the town center, just given the quality of those kinds of units, the developer interest, like you'd probably fill up the entire town center with those 3-story townhomes if you didn't say you wanted something else. So by going up to 60 units an acre and keeping your 4-story or 60-foot height limit, you can start to entertain the development that you see at the top. And so that development is going to be around 60 units an acre with some underground structured parking. We did a number of studies on different lots in the town center, in fact, almost all the lots in the town center, and we think doing 60 units an acre, 4 stories with 1 level of underground parking is actually quite feasible. Like you can get the required amount of parking, have some ground floor commercial, have the units up above, 3 stories of residential units above, and it generally the geometry and of it all works out.
What's the required parking?
The studies that we did, I think on the residential side, we kept with what the existing city code was. Your code requires, and I'll have to turn to Tom or to sort of pull up the specific numbers, but your code, it sort of tiers up depending on the number of bedrooms you have. And so we ended up just sort of taking that whole and we just kind of averaged it out in terms of our sort of studies. And I want to say the average was like around 1.5 maybe.
1.5 parking spots.
Yeah, it's because if you have studios, you're like 1.15 or something like that.
So is it studio housing? Maybe I should have asked that.
Yeah, what we looked at was average unit size of around 1,000 square feet on all of our studies. So Studio apartments,
studio.
one bedrooms are going to be
1 to 2 bedrooms.
maybe around, 600 to 800 square feet, 600 on the small side. If you're building in that kind of configuration of the 2 bedrooms, you're going to be pushing maybe 1,500, 1,600, 1,800 square feet, but probably not more than 2,000. So we looked at our studies, we just said the average unit size is 1,000 square feet. And because we're not in this plan trying to dictate that somebody does all studios or they do all 3 bedrooms, the market will determine kind of the optimum mix. And we felt that trying to really sort of predict that was a little bit challenging, given that we think in a lot of cities, when you see this 4-story mixed-use development, it tends to be a lot of smaller units, or the studios. It's really geared towards kind of, people fresh out of school, young professionals without families. But we know that one of the draws in Los Alamitos is the schools, and it's a very family-oriented place. So we think developer building this kind of unit or this kind of 4-story building, they may opt to do a wider range of family units just because of the desire for family housing in Los Alamitos. But your code doesn't require a particular mix. We didn't evaluate a particular mix when we did our studies or making this recommendation. As I said, we just assumed an average unit size of about 1,000 square feet.
What do you think the market for a development like this might be? And what I'm comparing this to is the project that was just completed on Cerritos. It's basically 2 stories, and it looks like it's going to rent up pretty quickly, I would imagine, depending on what the rental costs are, and I don't know the answer to that. So I guess the question is if developers have determined that that's a good size and they can make money on it in this area, do we think that the incentives we're talking about here with the higher densities will be sufficient to get them to move from something that obviously is working in this city to this higher density development?
We think so, but of course you'll have to actually get something in the ground and then get developer interest. I think one of the challenges I would say here is that all the properties are currently owned by private developers of varying degrees of interest in reinvesting and redeveloping in their property. So that's one of the big kind of unknowns, is whether existing property owners would be interested in developing their properties under this scenario, or simply selling to a developer that specializes in that mixed-use development.
Did you look at any approach? Because for this to work, it seems to me you're going to need some of the owners to consolidate, to be willing to take their property, match it with a neighbor's property, and then come in with the development. Do we know if there's any interest by any of the property?
As part of our outreach, and we could go to the next slide, if you will, Ron, because we did do outreach. Every single one of the outreach meetings that we did notice and reach out to the 38 odd property owners in the town center. We really, and staff really reached out to them hard to sort of say, please participate, tell us what your level of interest is. So all these different meetings, you see the property owners were all noticed, and we attempted to engage them. We did even, like at the very beginning, we did a survey of the property owners to kind of gauge their interest and understanding of the town center's possibilities. When we did our evaluation of individual properties, we did not assume lot consolidation. One of the things we were careful about as we looked at the plan, and as the plan that we ultimately developed, it is based largely, if not exclusively, on existing ownership. So we didn't assume that 3 property owners who've never talked to each other somehow have to come together to collaborate to bring you the town center. It's the plan and the footprint of the buildings that we looked at and studied, they're based on existing ownership. And so the 60 units an acre, 4 stories, this development, we think can work on all the majority of the parcels, except for some small ones, under existing ownership. So,
Have you found, my experience in other cities has been that if you can get one fairly good-sized, large development going, where you might consolidate projects or properties to make that development happen, that acts as a major catalyst for the rest of the area. So I don't know if that's something staff has on its radar, but I would certainly be checking with some of those property owners to see if we could encourage some consolidation so we got one really big, nice development going that would then foster, additional development in the area.
Sir, and I might take that one. So I do know in talking to staff that we've had a considerable amount of interest from developers and developer groups about going into this area and actually trying to acquire properties. So I think you're spot on in talking about how consolidation is ultimately the goal here. But I do think that, and it's something I'll give Placeworks and the team credit for, is that this is not a pie in the sky plan. This is something that can be developed with the actual footprints that we have on the ground today. But it does provide the framework to actually get us to that next level. So I can see, like I said, there's going to be a multitude of steps that come after this. The step one tonight is really just making sure that we're okay with that density level. But then from there, identifying, okay, what is the most likely property to turn over? And how exactly can the city play a role in that, either through a zoning discussion, through incentives on our side and such. So there is a way to do this that I think will get us to the finish line with what we have today, but there's definitely opportunities for this to be a lot bigger than what it is today.
If I could follow up on that, I would say, Mr. Bates, council member, that you're absolutely right. Usually in cities, if there's one fairly large development that comes in, proves the market, sets the stage, all the other surrounding developers want to get in on that action. At the risk of being insulting to the development community, they're often like lemmings. One of them has success with a good idea, and the rest of them go running off that cliff until the market isn't there anymore. But most of the cities I've worked in, one large development in your downtown turns the whole place around and all the other parcels that will follow. But what we did want to do is show that any individual parcel or property owner in the town center could be that trigger. They could be the one to jumpstart it. And so, in fact, that was actually one of the comments from one of your planning commissioners to show in our studies that any individual property could be one of those participants or the catalyst for this, including some that we initially thought, like, there's single-family homes on there, they'll never be part of this. There'll always be single-family homes, or will always be a gas station. But your planning commission challenged us and said, no, think about all the properties as potential catalysts. So, we looked at all of them.
I want to add, council, that, during this time that we did this town center mixed use, we dealt with a pandemic. So we went, I believe, above and beyond trying to get participation from the stakeholders, from the property owners and the proxy. We did, like I said, several notices out to the property owners and their proxy. We've paid for advertisement in the local paper to get stakeholders, residents to join in on the discussion. And of course, we have a very robust weekly email blast that we do and a social media campaign that we do. So during the time, we've tried really, really hard to go above and beyond to get the word out. And like the city manager stated is, the staff here is trying our best to create a relationship with property owners. So that's one of the goals that, we've had since I came over. And so, we've had multiple discussions with a very large property owner that is down in the town center on a numerous occasion to talk about that. And, they also own quite a few other properties in the city that's not at the town center, and talked about those properties as well. So we are trying to go forth to create that relationship. But again, tonight, this is just the first step. This is just the planning step into what we can hopefully can accomplish as we go down the road in the upcoming future.
Thank you.
I had a couple questions, just real quick. So you talked about the underground parking. Do we know for a fact environmentally we can support that? I know years ago over at the baseball field, we were looking at doing some underground parking just to accommodate all the parents. And because our water table was so low, we couldn't dig that deep. We do have one underground, the Pepper Tree condos, but those aren't truly underground. The condos are raised and then it's underneath that. So I just want to make sure, because if we don't have underground parking, this obviously has to change because there won't be, any feasible ways to park.
It's a good question. That did come up during our discussion about parking. We walked into our thinking on this that it was unlikely the development in Los Alamitos, a mixed-use development, would make sense to dig more than one level underground in the first place. It just seemed unlikely that a development would pencil out doing 2 levels of underground. The further you go underground, basically it doubles the cost of each parking space. So 2 levels underground is very expensive. 1 level is very expensive as well, but
Yeah,
2
because I think our
levels
water
definitely
table is
more.
like 7 inches. I mean, it's low.
Yeah, so we knew that going in as we drew these studies up, and so we assumed that, you know, if there were going to be underground parking, they'd have to deal with that through pumps or, you know, other kinds of waterproofing, and there are, you know, other cities that have addressed that issue. So it's really kind of a building technical issue. It does have cost implications.
Right.
But we also looked at there be some parking at grade, kind of tucked behind the retail, accessed off to alleys. You're fortunate that virtually all the properties in the town center have alley access, so you can deliver all your services, your trash, and parking coming off the alleys, and have some at-grade parking from the alleys that would then walk straight into the stores. So generally that would be, you know, the parking for the retail or commercial would be at grade, and then the residential would probably be down below. We also looked at a number of studies in particular sites, the one really large site in particular, including like a structured parking. And we did a number of studies sort of thinking, if you built structured parking, how much additional housing could you support without necessarily going underground? Would you be able to have a surplus of parking in that parking structure so it could support some additional commercial, a hotel? Could it support, could you build enough parking that in that structure that it could support some surrounding properties as well? So we looked at a number of different options for how to manage and kind of build parking. So the possibility that you might build a parking structure, either the city being kind of the full participant in it, or more likely in some sort of partnership with a private developer to be able to support the town center, is something that we looked at and is still part of the equation. We really wanted to, as you said, sort of allow any one of the properties to be the catalyst, and that there be a lot of different options as to how you approach this, so you can be quite flexible in how you respond to development interests, since with one small exception, all the land in the town center is held by private property owners. So you'll need to be responsive to their level of interest, I think.
Right, and then my other concern is moving to the 60 units per acre. Just because we could doesn't mean we should. We're not going to rent studio apartments here. People don't come here single. We don't have a dating scene. Ask my kids. So it's going to be a family thing. So now we're talking about new students. And we just put online 160 units between the townhomes here and the apartments that all feed into LAE, McAuliffe, and the high school. And now directly across the street, we're adding 580 new dwellings. That's probably going to be 500 kids at least. And overtaxing the schools on that, it just is a lot.
They'd love it. I think they'd love it.
Yeah.
Because they're down on enrollment right now.
Right now, but
Yeah.
we're coming off of COVID. Kids are starting to go back to school. So they're down on enrollment, not because it's a bad school district.
And I think that, Alan, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump right in front. So I would say that I think the 60 unit per acre limit is it's two things, both an economic reality and it's also, I think, a development necessity reality in terms of how you actually incentivize developers to actually come in and want to redevelop their property. It becomes an equation of just X amount of units cost X amount of dollars to build. So in order to achieve this, we need to be able to have a capacity to build Y. And so I think at the end of the day, we're going to see that those 560 units might not all be built in this area. I think that's probably the first reality that everyone needs to grapple with, that there's going to be property owners that decide, I'm happy with what I've got, I don't need to develop, and so therefore I'm going to stick with what I have. What it does do is creates incentive for the property owners that might be on the fence to say, you know what, I want to make sure that that I can only build a certain number. I want to be able to build to the max of what my property will allow me to do, therefore maximizing my profit. And so they will be hopefully the first ones to jump in and be ready to do development. This is a plan that, even if fully realized, will take us 10, 15 years to actually fully get there. And so I think that the influx of students will not be all at once. I think it'll be a drip over time as properties come online. The only scenario where I see it going down the road of a full-fledged development tomorrow is if a single property owner walks in and says, you know, I'm either going to partner with or I'm going to acquire all these properties in order to be able to build them to the maximum level that has been described in the plan. I don't really see a clear scenario that gets us to 588 in a short period of time at all.
Yeah, and then I'm also concerned about the mixed use because, when you see it over by Angel Stadium, you see it in downtown Brea. These aren't families. There is no outdoor space. There's no green space. We don't have any parks in that area. So is that going to be part of the development requirements that these owners need to do something?
And I think you're leading to a couple slides, but at the same time, it is something that I've written down that I wanted to mention, that the idea with a lot of these places is to build that sense of community, that third space. Everybody has the work or the school that they go to, everybody has their home, but there isn't that place that you go to that is outside of your home, that it's a place where you hang out with your family and your friends. The idea is to create that space here. And we all know from just going out to restaurants, we don't typically drive to go to just one place anymore. We want to drive to a place that has a nice outdoor area that we can walk and stroll. We can go and we can have a drink here, or we can go and have dinner here, and then we can go down to the shop down the street and buy something there before we get back in our car and drive home, or in this scenario, hopefully walk home. So the idea is to build these areas, but that's more of a function of when we get to the actual zoning that's involved, and then also the public improvements that we're going to require developers to do in order to take advantage of the new zoning that we're putting in place. So I think that there's enough protections to ensure that the council is going to have a strong voice in terms of what exactly do we want to see on the ground once it's built. I think that that's going to be definitely a function of not only the zoning that we ultimately have to bring back to all of you for approval, but also just the development agreements in principle are going to say, we expect there to be this type of open space, or you're going to add this amenity to the overall development of this area. So I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that discussion.
Yeah, and excuse me, I'm not against the development at all. I mean, we desperately need to facelift in that area. I just want to make sure that everything I've heard is to attract the developers. What are we going to do to attract the residents?
I got you. No, that is a very good consideration. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
got one more parking thing, since you opened the parking thing. I looked at the full agenda that was sent, and on page 42, there's something called parking pricing or pricing parking. And it looks like there's pay to park in some of the, and I abhor the name, but it's called Apartment Row. Or is there a consideration, because I can tell you now, no. Is there, because we don't have parking over there as it is, so I'm just, is that what that was? Like,
Well, that particular discussion on parking is that if you end up in a situation where you have severe parking problems and a lack of parking in the town center, I think you can, throw yourselves a party and say we succeeded, that we've attracted so much development, we now have a parking problem, because you certainly, surplus parking in there today, at least any time I've been there. So we looked at there being a number of different ways you could manage parking if you do end up into a situation where you do have a parking problem and the town center is so successful it begins to generate overflow parking that's impacting the surrounding neighborhoods. So one of them has been discussed before, and I think is part of your current agreements with the medical center, that you have either for employees or for special events, you use their parking structure and you have some sort of shuttle or people walk over. So that's kind of already in place. You should certainly avail yourselves of that
oh,
opportunity.
no, that's fantastic.
Sure,
I'm talking
yeah.
about, it looked like specific on like Reagan, and then parts of Green, and then parts of Howard, and then parts of Farquhar,
Right, and-
which are already overwhelmed with people who live there now and can't park.
So what we're suggesting in there is that if you do end up in a situation where you can demonstrate that there is town center parking that should be in the town center that's starting to park in the surrounding neighborhoods, that the most effective tool to regulate that is to institute a parking district. So residents get a parking pass to park there. And if you're not a resident, then you're not allowed to park there because you don't have the parking pass.
Oh, is that what the price parking meant on that slide?
There's also a suggestion that if at some point you really start having major parking challenges, that you would potentially entertain doing like metered parking within the town center itself. But I
But
think
not on the streets?
on the streets within the town center.
In town center. So,
Okay.
The
I'm gonna pull
most
slide up.
the most effective way of managing parking is ultimately through price controls. And we all do this, right? Like we will pull up to some place and we see that like parking over here is going to be $3 an hour or whatever. we will drive around the block until we find the cheap parking. But if you tell me all the parking is priced, I'm either going to find a different way to get there, or I'll just pay for the parking and just assume that's part of the cost of visiting a place. We all, ultimately, everybody sort of responds to parking with their pocketbook, and they're always searching for free parking.
Yes.
And so the most effective way to manage your parking is ultimately through price controls.
Oh,
And so
no,
we
Fran,
think-
I understand
Yeah.
that. I understand. I don't think I'm being clear, so I'm going to pull up the exact slide that I'm talking about.
Council member,
Yes.
um,
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, but
Help me.
if the rest of the council, we just have a few more slides. You guys are doing great, but we're just jumping a little bit ahead. So if you just let us finish our presentation, and then we'll address some of those. And then at the end, if we didn't address it, then we could answer your questions. Okay, but I know what you're talking about. We'll get there. 2 more slides,
Okay,
okay?
okay.
All right. So again, we just reached over, we did stakeholders. Again, we got feedback from, property owners or their proxy, the planning commission. We did one-on-one interviews with city council, and of course, we had stakeholder meetings. And out of those, there was a very strong support for these visions and goals that we came up with. So it was to integrate the town center with the school, the community, destination, and employment center, right? Invest in bike and pedestrian safety and infrastructure. Council is aware that a few months before we started this project, we did the active transportation plan, the ATP. So we did incorporate the ATP into this strategic plan. Promote a sense of community with high-quality gathering spaces. So this is something that the mayor alluded to. But this is what we are doing in terms of maybe reimagining Pine Street into a gathering area. Again, residents and council is aware that we do hold events there. Again, we have a Parklet series coming up. We have Winter Wonderland there. And we're trying to do this phrase called tactical urbanization, where we're trying to embed in the community's mind that that is our main street, that is our gathering place. We incorporate mixed-use development with some offices, residential support local businesses. Again, Mr. Loomis and council has alluded to, again, commercial on the bottom with residential up top. Create a destination for amenities for young people, families, and seniors. Again, I think council is aware, and they know, and we try to express that with our consultant here about what Los Alamitos is all about. It's about families because of the school district. It's about seniors, and it's about just being a place for sustaining a quality of life. Position the town center as an engine for sustainable and profitable center, so economic development is important. Reinforce and maintain connections with the medical center, and again, provide appropriate parking facilities and management. So that was something that, again, the residents, our council, our commission has strongly shared, and what our consultant, Mr. Loomis, said that it was very, very strong, and he's worked in the private sector with Placework, which is a very, very large company, and he said that, again, if I'm quoting it right, it was very rare that all 3 are on the same page. So that's something that everyone shared. I want to remind you that, again, we do understand what the residents and would like in our town center, but we have to understand city's priority as well. We have to align our planning efforts with housing needs. I mentioned at the beginning, we are mandated by the state for arena numbers. We have to bolster a diverse and resilient tax base, right, to jumpstart our economic development. As you are aware, council, tax revenue for us is very important. And of course, we got to reduce development uncertainty with a clear vision. Again, this is the first step. If we provide developers with a very clear vision of what the city would like, then they hopefully will follow in return. Okay, oops, I'm jumping some, forgot that. That's what I just said, understanding the city priority, okay? And then here's the recommended strategies, right? So number 1 there is mark the town center. So we wanted to have people, when they come into Los Alamitos, and that's what we're working on, is 1, they know that they're entering Los Alamitos, so we're working on that. But then when they get to the town center, we want to mark them to know that they are in the town center, and we want to put signature trees. Like when I go to Anaheim, I'm just giving an example, when I go by Disneyland, I get near Disneyland. We were just there a few weeks ago because of the Americano Awards. You see all the palm trees up, you know you're close to Disneyland. So that's something that we want similar here. We want to mark the town center. We want to reimagine Pine Street. We want to have a flexible public space to, again, have that gathering space for the community to come in, where residents and commercial or businesses can come together to, again, create a city, a sense of community. We want to build a mixed-use core. Again, it's a very fine balance between commercial and residential, but again, you know, we have to have that balance, again, to meet our arena numbers, but also to make sure that we have economic development and a strong tax base. We will, again, want to create a place to gather. That's a combination of public sidewalks, plazas, and paseos, just like the city manager stated. Today's trend is to go to dinner, and, you know, after dinner, you go to a dessert shop, and then after dessert shop, you do a little shopping, or you can stay for a little bit to hear a little musician or a little band play. So that's the trend of today, and so we want to create that place to gather. Consider parking. So here it is right here, parking facilities. Yes, there will be a balance of parking facilities where there is paid, right, where there's street paid or parking garages, but then there's also a blend of what you are referring to on Green Street and Howard Street, where it's not paid. It's for residents, but we have to manage that parking, and that's, you know, issuing out permits. That's free to the residents. We already have a permit process in place for a lot of our communities. And again, this is on the ticket to kind of revise that permit process. And then when this is into effect, we're going to have to sit there and manage our parking. So again, residents don't have to pay to park in front of their house. But then again, it's a balance between having paid parking and non-paid parking.
So, Mark found it for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna show it to you. Can I do that? I'm going to. This is exactly what I'm talking about.
Page 42 on the agenda,
Is it
42.
on the agenda presentation, or 82 on the PDF of the full agenda.
So that's
Exactly
that's
what I'm talking about. That cannot be-
correct. Priced parking.
This is,
Ron,
so it should be
Yeah.
the same.
Okay, copy that.
can I address that real quickly?
Yes.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Doby.
Oh, he
Now
said
that-
my full name. I'm listening, okay.
Taking your comments very seriously. So while we were in the break and I pulled up the file, I saw the diagram that you're referring to that you just showed Mr.
Yeah, all the
Director Noda.
restricted parking.
I understand exactly what you're talking about now.
Okay.
And yeah, this is a diagram to show the kind of the whole package of kind of parking options that you should be thinking about and that should be available to you. It's not saying that any of this should happen exactly here. That being said, you know, this is a relatively simple diagram. It doesn't set anything in stone. It's not setting policy, but if the council sort of feels that this diagram is a little too suggestive of meter parking within those neighborhoods, this would be a relatively easy diagram
Well, if
to
Brandon, if you were to
modify.
drive over there is huge multifamily units, specifically, densely already in that area. And the corner, one of those corners is actually our fire station. So there is a slew of parking that is just completely off limits anyway. So I just, you know, I feel like as a rep for the entire community, somebody has to say there cannot be, like, it should be restricted residential, like some of these other areas are restricted residential because our parking over there is even more important. We don't have driveways. Not everybody has a garage, and there are not very many parking lots. So it's like, I've had visitors come and they have to park 3 blocks away to come and visit me. And I couldn't even imagine, because we need a mix. Now listen, I'm a huge fan. We need more businesses in Los Alamitos. But, yeah, there's parking.
And I think to Vice Mayor, just to reiterate Alan's point, is that I think that the picture itself, we could probably tighten up just a little bit in order to make it clearer, the areas that we're looking at. But again, this document is really about putting all the options on the table. It's for the council to clearly define for developers out there, what exactly are you willing to look at or think about or contemplate? By putting all of these things on the table, it starts basically a negotiation with all the developers that are out there. And so what I would encourage is to not take particular elements out of the plan just yet, but understand, like you have today, that there are concerns about, hey, if you use this particular paid parking in order to meet some of the parking requirement, there's all of these other issues that it brings up that we have to talk about. And that, I think, is an important point to make sure that we record for the document as we go forward.
Thank you.
Right. Again, the last 2 bullet points on this particular slide here is promote housing. again, is housing is a essential component and a key priority right now that we're dealing with. And then the last bullet point is to connect to neighborhoods, design key corridors as a multimodal bike and pedestrian thoroughfare. That, again, with the active transportation plan, we want to make the city of Los Alamitos more bike-friendly, more pedestrian-friendly. So what is next? Right? So what's next is, again, some key stuff here is a general plan amendment, right? A zoning code amendment, again, including density, some setback standards, some on-site parking standards that we'd have to take a look at and review. A transfer of development rights, transfer between properties located in town center, inclusionary housing ordinance. Adoption will assist Los Alamitos to meet its housing needs. And then Pine Street parking credit, assist retail restaurant in town center. Included in next steps are, right now, we are looking as a staff to look at the grants, active transportation grants or infrastructure grants to assist with the ATP to lead into the town center, or infrastructure grant to assist with maybe reimagining Pine Street. And then, just trying to look at and trying to implement other things such as marking the town center, planting of the trees, implementing bike lanes on Reagan Street, updating our CIP project. So anytime we do CIP projects or grants or any type of, other, basically, every time we think about something, we try to tie in the town center to it. Just one crazy one out there is, I drive around Rossmore and I see a lot of golf carts. So I'm thinking, like, how can I get golf carts to our town center? So we're thinking of, like, doing a golf cart path across Wallingford, because it's illegal, anything. So we're even thinking of that far about marking golf cart paths, so that it just makes it easier to get to the town center by either doing a golf cart or walking or biking and all that stuff. So again, every time we think of something, we think of the town center. So hopefully we can get this plan adopted and start that relationship with property owners to get this plan hopefully to come into fruition one day.
Ron, if we can go back one slide. At the bottom of that slide, connect to neighborhoods. Talk with me, if you will, about, I think, the most critical connection in this whole plan, and that is our largest employer is just on the other side of this neighborhood. And on the other side of them are the medical buildings that are adding to not maybe the direct employment at the hospital, which is our largest employer, but adding additional bodies to that. So I'm very curious as to what our thinking is. In fact, it may have to extend to our buying a right-of-way that's wide enough to fit golf carts. But to get from the medical center to the downtown area. So how is that discussed? What's the thinking there? Because I think if we miss that opportunity, we're missing the boat, in my opinion.
There's a couple ways that we think about it. So when we were looking at a map, we saw that the medical center can reach the downtown area through Catella, of course. So one of the plans we think about is widening the sidewalk to make it more, accessible and more, that walk is more pleasant by adding more trees and more landscaping to, enhance people to walk. The secondary place is Florista, right? And so, again, as part of our street improvement project for this fiscal year, we are doing Florista in terms of grinding and asphalting it to make it a brand-new street. So it goes all the way down Florista and then Cherry Street. Then hopefully the new street with the new street markings that we have out there will, again, enhance people to come walk to get to the town center. So those are the two ways that we were thinking, again, trying to connect the medical center to the town center.
Okay. And there's something we could do with Cherry and Florista potentially to make it more attractive, to make that walk.
Correct. So again, as we go out there and we get in with the property owners and they're there to redevelop, we can work with the property owners to make the landscaping more, aesthetically enhancing, again, to make that walk more pleasant. Correct.
Could we do like, if you've been to Second and PCH, they have this super cute like ice cream shop, and it has a little character, I think his name is Tokido or something. Could we have like little figures? And then it could be like a little scavenger hunt or like something, I'm sure Emlyn would incorporate it, where around certain holidays, it's like, okay, go pop your picture and you can upload it to our social site. Could we do something like that?
Of course.
Maybe not Tokyo, somebody already did that.
Yeah, anything's on the table, you know? So I've learned that nothing's off the table. So when we get there, we'll bring that to the
I
discussion.
think that'd be cute.
We need a Los Alamitos mascot, of some sort.
Yeah.
I would say when we looked at the reconfiguration of Pine Street, we did think that where Pine comes down to Catella, that because you're probably going to continue to restrict that to right turn in, right turn out, you've got an opportunity there with some land that you're not going to need for roadway to be able to do like a clock tower, whatever sort of public sculpture the sort of city would want to sort of put there, that there's a really good opportunity to create a kind of really, that kind of placemaking Instagram icon sort of place right there and really mark that's the entrance to the town center, so.
Alan stole my comment, the Instagramming of Los Alamitos. One of the things, though, that we will be bringing back before the council in the coming year will be kind of a discussion about public art and how exactly we use it in different areas, not only to attract new businesses and new users, but also to just enhance some of the things that we already have in town and draw attention to them. So it's amazing what putting a pair of wings on the side of a building will do for business. And so trying to figure out ways to incorporate that into our business plan is something that I think not only property owners are going to look at, but also the end user at the end of the day. You're absolutely right.
Every now and again, I get one.
Concludes the presentation. Of course, Alan, and we have our associate planner, Tom, here for any other questions or comments.
Okay, and being this is a public hearing, I'll open it up to public comments. Don't be shy.
Thank you for the presentation and the opportunity to give comment. When I think of Los Alamitos, I think of families. And families need space, they need parks, they need schools. And so when I look at the density, I'm thinking of like little kids, where are they going to put their bikes? Are you going to put the bike in the living room with the furniture? You know, so it's just thinking of our community and those needs. You know, I liked your comment about, you know, we don't have a dating scene in Los Alamitos. Nobody comes here to meet their husband, okay? You know, you usually come here with your families to raise a family. And so, did you meet your husband here? Okay. So, you know, people move here for the schools and the community and the safety. One of the things that I think is really important is home ownership. There are so many young people. I mean, sometimes I look at the prices that things sell for, and, you know, it's like, what's wrong with trying to develop and give others an opportunity to own their own home? And I don't know what all the rules are around whatever, you know, state mandate you have regarding our housing situation. But, you know, thinking about that, you know, just giving people an opportunity to invest in Los Alamitos, make Los Alamitos their home. When I think about apartments, they're just transitional, you know. Also, you know, we talked about the parking. The parking is crazy there already. There are some units that do have parking already with the unit, but I've seen that people still park out in the street because they have all their boxes in the garage, and so they're parking on the street. I have seen flyers from, when I walk the neighborhood, if there's a rental and there's information about the rental, I always get those flyers because I'm just dying to know, like, what are they renting for here in Los Al? And I've noticed that sometimes people actually rent out their garages. So they park in the street and they're renting out their garage. So, parking is definitely a big issue here. I don't see how even charging people for parking, I don't see where people are going to put their cars. And then 1,000 square feet for a unit, when you're thinking about who's going to move here, because they're not moving here for the dating scene, 1,000 square feet is not that big for a family, for small children.
900.
What's that?
I was going to say, some of us grew up in houses
I know.
that were 900 square feet with
Yeah.
2 bedrooms and
Oh, yeah.
2 or 3 kids, plus the whole family.
My husband hates it when I say this, but, we bought a shoebox in Los Alamitos just to live in Los Alamitos because they're really small, right? Those houses that were built in the 40s are really tiny. Yeah. I don't know how people do it. So those are really my thoughts and my concerns that I wanted to share. I don't see a whole lot of people here from the community. I know I do have some friends that are watching online because I did share the agenda with some neighbors. And so I've been canvassing for the June election and the November election. I've been canvassing, my husband and I have been canvassing our precinct, which is, our neighborhood. So I'll be sharing this information with our community as well so that they're aware that this is happening. But, and also, one last thing, this one example here of the, where you have the storefront and the apartments above it.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work in downtown Long Beach, and they have a lot of that on Pine Street in downtown Long Beach. And it's really tight. I used to have to park in like the Walmart parking lot, that public parking, and then walk to the office building. But they have those there on Pine Street in downtown Long Beach, and I just don't see that here in this community. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Want to come on up?
I didn't plan to really speak, but I just wanted to share with my father, and I worked for my father developing shopping centers and in the construction business, developing property. My father was a very, very successful real estate developer. I don't know anything about the master plan for what is going on here. This is the first I've heard of it today. I'm all for developing, but you have to be sensitive of the community around there and where's the cars are going. And you don't want to cram them all in there like sardines. You're going to ruin the whole city. The charm of Los Alamitos, to me, was that it was kind of like Andy Mayberry. It was kind of like a little building, and it had that old town feel about it. And I think you want to clean up the downtown area. That's great. Widen the sidewalks, nice trees. Encourage people to use that one street, which is technically the downtown area. But I haven't even looked at the plans for this. My dad is gone. He went to heaven 20 years ago. I mean, she just told me about this tonight. But I just hope that you really think about what you're going to do here and don't turn this into like Santa Monica by the ocean, or where it's just people crammed in. The apartment row over there, there's no place to park. That's a mess. I mean, the parking is brutal. And I mean, I hope that you really think about what you let people build, units and what they're cramming them in. That's all I can say. And I want good things for this city. It's a wonderful little city. I hope that we don't overdevelop it and turn it into a mess. Because I personally own a beautiful home in Huntington Beach. What they did in the downtown areas, they built some big hotels. It's beautiful. But a lot of people I talk to do not want to go down there because there's no parking and the homeless people there, and it's just turned into a mess. It's beautiful buildings, but I don't take my wife there. The last time I went down there, I couldn't find places to park. It's just too crowded, and there's just a big homeless problem there. And I'm just saying, I remember Huntington Beach when it was a surfer town, and it was peaceful. You know what I mean? Now I don't even go there, and they lost it. I mean, the The real estate developers, they make their money. That's what my dad did. I worked for him. And they made a lot of money building Costco, Home Depot. My father, I worked for him. I understand the game. I'm just saying is be real sensitive to what you guys let them do. And make sure that you always keep it in your pocket that you're going to end up with a good product at the end, not a mess. Okay? That's all I can say.
Great, thank you. All right, see no other public comments. I'll bring it back. I think the three extroverts up here have already used their quota of words. But any comments?
No, I mean, I know this process has been going on for a very long time. You know, the state of California is requiring that we make allotments for additional housing. You know, I appreciate all the work that city staff has done, the planning commission has done. They've put in a lot more work than we have on this and really studied it. I think this is, you know, I know this is just the first step in a long process. We're not approving any specific projects today. This is, you know, 10, 15 years down the road. But the truth is we've got a downtown that's been neglected by private industry. They haven't really done much down there, and they're not going to do much down there unless we incentivize them somehow. We provide a vision for them long term. There's going to be challenges, of course, but I think we need to provide that incentive to the businesses to do more, and to the property owners to either sell or to develop themselves so that we have an actual downtown. We don't have an actual downtown right now. My neighbors, all my friends in my neighborhood, when they want to go somewhere lively, when they've got young kids and they want to go somewhere fun, they'll go to Main Street and Seal Beach. Why don't we have a place like that? And I think this is a great vision, a great starting point to trying to get that vision so that, you know, maybe our grandkids will be able to enjoy something similar, a little bit of a social life in Los Alamitos. It's not going to be our kids. Our kids will be long gone by the time anything happens here in terms of, you know, their age. They'll grow out of it. So maybe their kids will get to enjoy it as they're growing up. But I think it's a great plan.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? No, and I agree with Mark. I think this is exciting. I just want to make sure that we keep our eye on the people and not the developers. And I know we do. Staff has always, you know, been very cognizant of what's going to impact the residents. But I think this is a huge step in the right direction. We actually have a spot identified now that we can start talking about it and branding it and everything. So,
and maybe we think about renaming Pine to Main Street or Town Center or something like that down the road. But
something like that, yeah. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and make the motion to adopt the City Council resolution. This is just approving the moving forward of the general plan amendment and the zoning amendment.
What it is tonight is it's the first, again, like you said, Mayor, it's the first step in a very long process. We'll be bringing back a number of elements to you, the zoning, traffic planning, parking, all of the design elements that go into Pine Street, potentially the renaming of Pine Street. Tonight is really just about adopting the resolution that enacts the change of the zoning from 30 to 60, and then also allows for the inclusion of the amendment to the environmental documents to the general plan. So there'll be many, many, many more bites at this apple before we even get to a place of being able to talk about a project. And I do want to say that your comments and the comments from the public were incredibly well-founded. We do not, and the intention of this plan is not to build Santa Monica. It is to build just another place where we can actually capture enough businesses and provide some additional housing in town.
Perfect. So I'll go ahead. I made that motion.
I'll second.
Okay. And do you need to read it?
No, Mayor, this item's a resolution, so
Oh, gotcha.
it does not need to be read.
Okay. And we don't need to do a roll call vote, correct? All right. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
No opposed? All right. Get working. I'd like my grandkids to enjoy it one day. All right, and with that, there is no closed session tonight, so I'll adjourn the meeting until our next regular meeting, which is next Monday at 6 o'clock. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.